So the Alexandrian Institute is built around the three pillars of scripture, theology, and culture. How do those integrate together, and what do they have to offer for our contemporary moment?
Yeah, so I see theology as thinking through scripture and its significance for all of life. So there are the three pillars: theology, scripture, and all of life, culture.
Yeah.
Everything humans do that's not by reflex, that's our life.
Yeah.
And I think it's so important to have those three pillars today because we're trying to help people become Christianly literate. And to be Christianly literate, I think you need to be biblically literate, doctrinally literate, and culturally literate.
Yeah. And in many ways, this is thinking through what's traditionally known as the Theological Encyclopedia, which would be theology's self-consciousness or its reflection on what it is. And in this way, theology and culture both act as contexts in which we're doing theology, and scripture is really undergirding it. Bavinck has a helpful illustration here of thinking through the Theological Encyclopedia, where scripture is really the root or the trunk. Theology builds up from the roots into that trunk, and then culture or the practical elements of theology are really the branches. So in this way, all of these are really connected, but it's ultimately scripture that we're rooting our theology in.
What do you think we lose if we take one away? Say, we need scripture. Why can't we just go straight from scripture to culture? Why do we need theology? And then vice versa with culture. What do we lose if we take that pillar out?
I like to say that the Bible raises questions, and reading the Bible raises questions that only theology can answer. And unless you ask the questions and think about the questions, you're liable to make a mistake in thinking you're biblical in your culture.
Yeah.
And maybe you're just living the way the culture is telling you to live. So theology involves that critical moment. Are we reflecting scripture in this time and place?
And I think in many ways, pretending that we can do theology with just scripture is a little intellectually dishonest, in that we're all embedded within various cultures, and theological history or the tradition of the church or the communion of the saints can only really help us in our understanding of what scripture is. Otherwise, we're really just taking carte blanche what the culture is offering us and reading that into scripture.
And not even realizing it.
Right.
It's the easiest thing to do, to read the Bible in such a way that validates your already formed opinions.
Yeah.
Because it's less threatening.
Yes.
Retrieval has become a buzzword, positively and negatively, in our culture today, our Christian culture today. What might we mean by it, and why might that be so important as it relates to seeing our blind spots?
Well, I see retrieval as a way of looking back to the past, but with a purpose of going forward. It's also a little bit like travel. In order to find out how other people read the Bible, we need to travel either to another place or to another time, and retrieval allows us to travel to another time. Travel is educational in and of itself. But I think it's also important to say that we don't mean by retrieval a kind of mechanical repetition. You know, we're not just trying to repeat what's already been said. We're looking back, yes, but in light of our problems.
I like to think about retrieval through the virtue of gratitude. If you have gratitude for the past, you'll be inclined to take wisdom from it, be willing to learn from it, incorporate it into your own thinking. At the same time, the virtue of gratitude requires a posture, that same posture towards the present. In other words, we can't just think that the past is perfect and therefore bring that into our own time. We also have to be grateful for what is happening in theology within our own context.
That's well said, because C.S. Lewis has this idea of chronological snobbery, and usually he means by it moderns looking down at the past. But there could be a reverse chronological snobbery, where if you aren't thinking the way the fathers did, then it's of no use. So I like the way we should be grateful for our fathers and our peers.
it's part and parcel of what it means to read Scripture temporally bounded. Like we are in our own moment, in our own time. We can't go back, nor will we jump all the way forward. We must read and confess it for ourselves, but to do that wisely and with gratitude, we realize that that's not an individual endeavor. What are some dangers to retrieval? We've just talked about the positive aspects, but what are some things that we ought to look out for, especially as Protestants, for how we do retrieval?
Yeah, I've kind of touched on it a little bit, but a danger would be thinking that our own time is exactly like the past, and that we can just simply take the theology of the 13th century, the 17th century, or the 1st century and read that into our current exact moment. We have to be culturally aware of that this moment in its own way is distinct and requires distinct answers.
Yeah, there's a danger of nostalgia, of thinking that there was a golden age, an Eden time in theology, that if we could simply recreate that would solve all problems. But you're right, the problems that we face are often new and require fresh thinking as well as mining from the past.
So then, in what way should we discourse with the great tradition?
I think it's helpful to take the posture of a learner, one who's entering into a conversation, really striving to learn. And true learning does sometimes require that you disagree with your master. I think Barth has a lovely little paragraph at the start of his reflections on Calvin, that sometimes learning from Calvin requires you to disagree with him. But to disagree honestly with him requires you to actually learn what Calvin is saying, to wrestle with the precise theological terms and argumentation that he's making. So I think having this posture of learning from the past actually enables us to move forward with it.
The past is often a foreign land to us. It's strange because we don't do things that way anymore. And when we come up against something strange or other than us, I think we need to take our time, be patient, be very attentive. And in working with older theology, I think I encourage my students to try to be as charitable as you can. Read them as though they knew what they were talking about, as though they were making sense, as though they were speaking truth. Read them as charitably as you can, and only then read them critically and ask the questions that perhaps you think they aren't answering. But it does take, we have to be learners first and listeners, and that's hard work.
So many theological students today learn how to read critically, but not formatively. How has that affected the church, and what's the remedy?
It's true that we live in a critical age, and I think the one big danger that I see is the danger of dualism. That is, thinking that being a theologian or being a Christian is a matter of right belief and right thought and critical thinking only, and that means an emphasis on the head or the intellect and not the heart. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 14, I will pray with the spirit, but I will pray with my mind also. Mind and spirit, mind and heart. And I'm very concerned about the dualism of people who may have the right thoughts, but if they haven't absorbed that truth into their lives won't correspond to the truth of the gospel.
I think there's a real danger in folks only being trained how to be critical of something. There's a great story of Ludwig Wittgenstein critiquing one of his colleagues, critiquing one of his colleagues who was an English professor who was a literary critic of poetry. And Wittgenstein told him to give it up, to stop being a literary critic. And really what he meant by this, I think we can infer from another spot in Wittgenstein where one of his students would ask Wittgenstein, what does this poem mean? And Wittgenstein's only advice to the student would be to read it again. In other words, there's something to this task of criticism that actually makes us miss out on meaning, miss out on understanding, and miss out on the purpose of texts and things. And so it's important that we look beyond criticism, really to the building up and understanding, really, ultimately.
Can I add an anecdote to this then? Because you mentioned Wittgenstein. I want to mention C.S. Lewis and his brilliant little essay, Meditation in a Tool Shed. He's imagining walking into a dark tool shed, seeing a beam of light, and at a critical distance, what you see are the specks of dust floating in the light, and he calls that looking at. And it's a critical standoffish approach. And he contrasts it with stepping into the light and then looking along the light, and you no longer see specks of dust. You're in the light. You see the sun, the source of the light. And think about reading in those two modes, always a kind of critical distance, I'm not really involved in this, or stepping into the text and looking along the text to what the authors see. You get a very different reading experience.
So why does the Alexandrian Institute seek to be a global institution? How might a global character affect the scholars and students in the work that they do with us?
I think it's a natural extension from the desire to connect to the great tradition. The great tradition talks about continuity through time. Globality talks about extension through space. And it's the same lesson that we're learning, that we have blind spots. We're located in particular locations, particular points of view, and being exposed to the Catholicity, the universality of the saints is conducive to our own formation.
Yeah, I think it's really one of the unique aspects of what we can do at the Alexandrian Institute is really affirm folks in where they are and encourage them to be in their location. Yes, we're a remote institution, and that way we're oddly displaced maybe, but there's a way that we can really affirm where our students are at and really learn from them. I think one of my favorite parts of seminary was that global experience, having the opportunity to rub shoulders with students from various continents, and even professors from various continents. There's a real, I like the way you put it with Catholicity. There's a beauty to the Catholicity of the Church, of being able to learn from its own inherent diversity.
It's also a reflection of what the Church is. The Church is global, and many missiologists and church historians are reminding us that most Christians now live in the global South. So I think it's important to be global if we want to stay alive.